Thank you, Don, and thank you, everybody, and thanks, Joe, for the invitation. I always like to start off when speaking in public with a joke, but actually my compatriots in England in the Conservative Party are actually doing it for me today, and I can't really compete with what they're going on in there, which will happen in the next few minutes. A few days, actually though, my light-hearted comments get me into trouble a bit sometimes. A few days ago I was on national BBC radio and I referred to Northern Ireland as a failed state. Now that upset a few people, not just unionists, but it did upset people, and therefore I'm trying now to refer to Northern Ireland as a dysfunctional society. No one, I think, is able to challenge me on this, even unionists of the most ardent complexion. So let's look at the evidence about why I believe and why I would argue that Northern Ireland is a dysfunctional society. Well, firstly, the Stormont. Stormont's not sat for 2.5 years, so that's pretty obvious, isn't it, really? And even when it did, you had political parties that were unable to enter into the type of partnership that was necessary to run the place. Then we've got segregation. We educate our kids, for the most part, separately. We don't teach them how to live with each other, and actually in the process, through the public service duplication based around doing things differently for different communities, we're wasting around 1 billion, perhaps 1.5 billion pounds every year. And just have a think about that. So that let's lead us into the next of the S failures, which is subvention. So we are actually subsidised by UK taxpayers. According to the Treasury, it's about £10 billion a year. Now that, dare you tell English nationalists, is a bit more than the amount of money that the UK pays into the European Union, which has led to all this mess around Brexit. So you've got the 10 billion. Actually, Tom Healy from the Nevin Economic Research Institute looked at the figures. He says, well, actually, if you strip out the costs that are not related to Northern Ireland, but those that are broadly UK factors, such as debt interest repayments and the contribution to the armed services, etc., there's around £5 billion. But that's still a hell of a lot of money. Then you've got the next S, which is security. Or, to put it another way, it's paramilitary crime. I live a 5-minute walk from where Lyra McKee was murdered a few weeks ago. So for me, an Englishman living in Derry, this feels incredibly unpleasant and personal. And I wonder sometimes why I came over to live in Northern Ireland. But then we have the schools. Now, I hear repeatedly that we have the best schools anywhere in Northern Ireland, which actually is probably true if you are pretty affluent in County Down or County Antrim. But actually, for people in working class areas, whether they're loyalists or whether they're Republican, it is not true. It is a system of division, and the division based on class within our society in Northern Ireland is every bit as bad and serious as that based on religion. And that leads us into the next of the S's, which is skills, because actually, as a result of having a failing school system, we've got far too many kids that leave school, and actually it's mostly boys, and actually it's more loyalist boys than anything else. We have so many boys who leave school without the basic skills they need for life and without the basic skills that they need for employability. And it is absolutely unacceptable. And that leads into a lack of vocational skills that we need to base our industry around. And also, we happen to have the smallest higher education sector of any part of the United Kingdom, much smaller than in the Republic. And that means that we don't have the graduate skills we need either to build our industrial base and to build our intellectual base as we go forward. We lose about a third of our students off to other places, and most of them do not return. Then we have infrastructure. I live in Derry. The other week it took me 2 hours and 40 minutes to go from the bus station in Derry to the bus station in Belfast. This is not unique. It is 70 miles. It was 135 miles from Derry to Dublin, and it can take 5 hours, 4 hours typically. When I lived in Leicester, 100 miles from London, I could get a train that got me there in 1 hour. And that shows it was a reflection of the failure to invest in the infrastructure in Northern Ireland. And inevitably, that leads into the first of the non-S's, the productivity problem. We have the lowest, joint with Wales actually, the lowest productivity in the UK. But specifically where I live in Derry, we have the lowest productivity probably of anywhere in the UK, one of the lowest in Europe. We have one great benefit by living in Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, which is that we have a National Health Service. But unfortunately, we have a National Health Service that is also not succeeding. We have terribly long waiting lists, very long waiting times, even to see a GP. We have a great system that is being failed, not simply about investment, but actually the failure to reform it quickly enough. And that goes back, again, to the fact we don't have Stormont sitting. Then we have another problem. We have Brexit. And the UK Treasury believes that over a 15-year period, a no-deal Brexit would leave Northern Ireland's economy 12% smaller than it would be if we hadn't left the European Union. In the agri-food sector, we have a real crisis. So much of the agri-food sector is cross-border production. How that will succeed with a border, I have no idea. One person I spoke to said they tried to plan for a no-deal Brexit. They were kept on meeting on Monday mornings, and in the end they just decided, well, there is one solution, which is we close. And that's a business that employs hundreds of people. And that is not unique. And if you look at the suggestions, if you look at the plans people had before Brexit, then actually the Economists for Free Trade, what used to be called the Economists for Brexit, their plan is basically in part around the eradication of the UK agri-food sector. They believe it is better to import than to produce our own. That way you get rid of the common agricultural policy, you reduce the costs, and actually we have a different economic base. We have lower land prices, which enables people to buy homes, but actually, by the way, it does mean that the farming industry goes down the pan. Now, talking still about Brexit, the phrase that was used was taking back control. And here we have the essential problem about the border, which is how you take back control of your borders while having an open border within Ireland, an open border between the United Kingdom and the European Union. That is beyond me, and I'm afraid that seems to be beyond the Brexiteers. There are 4 possible approaches to Brexit, and I won't say that they are solutions, they are approaches. The first is that the UK stays within the customs union and the single market. That is not acceptable to large numbers of people within the Conservative Party. The second is that we have a halfway house, so that Northern Ireland stays both within the United Kingdom, at least for the present time, and in the European Union's single market and customs union. That is not acceptable to the DUP, and it's not acceptable to parts of the Conservative Party. The third is we have a controlled border. The fourth is that there's a technological solution. I interviewed Gregory Campbell a few weeks ago, leading DUP MP, and I said to him, okay, you want a technological solution. Show me where it is. And he said, well, it doesn't exist yet. And I also said, I understand how a big company like Bombardier in Belfast can actually have a technological solution. I don't understand how individual farmers can have a technological solution to the border. I didn't get an answer to that. Then there is a fifth approach, theoretically, which is Irexit. That Ireland also does what the traditional colonial master wants it to do, which is to go with it and not with these nasty foreigners in Europe. Well, I see no evidence whatsoever that actually that is welcomed within Ireland, and I see no reason why it should, and I do find it pretty offensive when I hear some Brexiteers say that is the way to do things. The truth is that Northern Ireland needs to have continued open trading relationships both with the Republic of Ireland and the rest of the EU and with Great Britain. I hear Brexiteers say, well, actually, we do most of our trade with Great Britain. That is what's important. They ignore 2 things. Firstly, more businesses in Northern Ireland do business with the south of Ireland than do it with Great Britain. It's just that they are smaller businesses. And the second thing is that large quantities of the trade that's done between Northern Ireland and Great Britain is based around the agri-food sector and based around cross-border production. So actually the trade that we do with Great Britain from Northern Ireland will be severely diminished through Brexit and through any borders that happen within Ireland. But things now are changing within Northern Ireland. Firstly, we have demographic changes. There is no longer a unionist majority, either in terms of the overall population, in terms of the working population, in terms of the political situation in the Stormont or within the Belfast City Council, for example. Things are changing. We also have a much younger society. You have many more people in Northern Ireland that don't come from either traditions. More people like me, for example, and my family, who don't connect to either the main traditions and actually want to see a socially liberal society in Northern Ireland. Occasionally, I'm told I don't have a right to talk about these things because I'm an outsider. But actually, large numbers of people are outsiders, and my kids, some of them were born in Northern Ireland or else grew up there. So how about a solution? The Irish Republic is economically successful and socially liberal. It's my kind of country. But calling for a border poll today is, in my opinion, strategically not very intelligent. It is not sensible. It is not politically wise. So I will not agree, will not support a border poll today. Ireland has its own challenges: housing, health, and not least the debt that it's carrying from bailing out the banks. Reunification is, in my opinion, the most sensible approach over the medium term. The question is how we get there. I suggest that we have to start by making Northern Ireland work better. Both Unionists and Republicans need to recognise they have a common cause to make Northern Ireland a better and more successful place. They actually do both have selfish and strategic interests in doing so. I don't believe that the Republic is in a position today to cover the fiscal deficit of Northern Ireland. Nor do I believe that Unionists should be relaxed about the continuing willingness of English nationalists to cover the subvention. Political representatives of both the main traditions need to recognise that the future of their positions requires them to make Northern Ireland work. We need a government in Northern Ireland committed to reform of our health service and school system, investing in skills and infrastructure. A government that is determined to tackle social deprivation, inequality, poverty, creating jobs, expanding the economy. In the short term, there is an obvious approach to be taken, which is to copy the measures the Republic has taken to turn around its economy. This is not just about tax rates, but more importantly, about investing in skills and infrastructure. It's also about an even greater integration of the all-Ireland economy, despite the challenges of Brexit. As it happens, I believe the UK has a moral duty to Northern Ireland which it has ducked. People expected the Good Friday Agreement to provide a peace dividend, yet it hasn't. The gap between the employment rate in Britain and that in Northern Ireland hasn't closed. There remains serious poverty and economic inactivity in many working-class areas of Northern Ireland. The suicide rate has actually increased since the Good Friday Agreement. I believe the UK government should recognise both its responsibilities and its failures by investing directly into Northern Ireland infrastructure above and beyond the city deals that it's agreed with both Belfast and Derry. The Republic also needs to change, dare I say. This is not just because we need to persuade unions to consider the future. Northern Ireland cannot simply be bolted on to the Republic. There is widespread resistance in Northern Ireland, including in nationalist and Republican communities, to the idea of joining an insurance-based healthcare system. Ireland's move towards reforming healthcare, Shlontacare, backed by increased all-Ireland health provision, is important to win support for unification. But this too cannot happen quickly. Shlontacare is a 10-year programme which is behind schedule. So my proposal is to learn from Brexit and not try to do such an immense project too quickly. A 10-year time frame might be realistic for the transition. But first we need to prepare for the border poll, though we might want to change the words. Many unions are very sensitive and will resist any terminology that they feel is closely associated with Sinn Féin. Let's not lose the objective because of the words we use. And if that means talking about a dysfunctional society rather than a failed state, then I'll buy into that. And if it also means discussion of a new Union of Ireland, as Jimmy Nesbitt has talked of, then fine. But also, we have to talk about what that means. It means a conversation led by civil society in which civic nationalism and civic unionists and civic neutrals come together and discuss and prove they can do so rationally and objectively. Irish unity cannot be achieved if the cause is associated or claimed by just one political party. A time frame of not less than 2 years to prepare for a referendum in which we put together what the new nation would be called and the detail of what it looks like seems sensible for me. The human rights Professor Colin Harvey has suggested the 22nd of May 2023. I wouldn't argue against that. But I don't think we should pretend that changing the constitutional status of Northern Ireland is like an on-off switch or replacing a piece of furniture. It isn't. Northern Ireland is dysfunctional, and we need to make it functional. That is not simple or quick. We need a programme for economic and social recovery, along with reconciliation. We need reform, and realistically, we need a financial subsidy from the UK government to be tapered off rather than simply switched off. That would create a long-term saving for UK taxpayers while also continuing to support the very many people in Northern Ireland who regard themselves as British nationals and who will continue to be British nationals if they so wish after reunification. Perhaps this is simply too big a task and we should abandon it as impossible. But I don't think so. In my life, we've had the collapse of the Soviet Union, the collapse of Yugoslavia, reunification of Germany, the evolution into the European Union, Brexit, the return of Hong Kong to China. These are all big changes. Some have involved terrible events, giving us a warning about the need to plan and manage change. For us, surely, the starting point is for the Irish government to have a plan. Enda Kenny's government deserves enormous credit for planning for the eventuality of a Brexit leave vote when the government of David Cameron failed to do so. Let us now call on the government of Leo Varadkar and Simon Coveney to show equal foresight by planning for what a new Union of Ireland might look like and how we arrive there. This plan needs to consider whether there must be a new constitution, a new name, a bonding around a new sense of shared identity. We clearly need a better sub-regional economic framework for the new Union of Ireland, along with an integrated free at point of delivery health service and a housing system that works for the entire population. Among the constitutional questions is the role of Stormont, whether it should continue, and if so, whether the other provinces should have their own regional government despite having shown no signs of wanting one. And we need a careful examination of the fiscal implications of reunification. Not all events are foreseeable, but those events that can be foreseen should be prepared for to enable them to be managed. It starts with a conversation about the future, and that conversation has begun. Thank you.